Every other Kubernetes policy tool makes you learn a new language before you can write a single row. Kyverno doesn't. It's a YAML all the way down. That one difference changes what you study, how long it takes, and where this exam can actually hurt you. Most KCA prep treats it like a policy theory exam, but it's not. It's a YAML exam with an architecture question hiding inside of it. I'm Mikhailo, a senior SRE, and the KCA was one of the 15 CNCF certs on the Golden Kubastronaut track. I passed it from the first attempt, and I'll give you the score near to the end of this video. There are no Rego, no custom DSL, and just YAML. Kyverno is the only policy engine where writing Kubernetes resources is the entire skill required. Sit with that for a second, because it's the whole reason your prep plan for this exam looks different from any other policy exam. If you used the OPA gatekeeper before, you had to learn the Rego first. Separate the query language, separate the mental model, and separate way of being wrong. That's the real study time before you write anything useful. Kyverno deleted that step. A policy is the Kubernetes resource. Same API structure, same spec block, and same kubectl apply. If you can write a deployment, you can read the Kyverno policy on a day one. There is also less to operate, no separate engine sitting besides your cluster. That makes the exam faster to prepare for. That doesn't make it easy, obviously, but the YAML is free, and what costs you points is knowing what runs where and what blocks what. Hold that thought, because it comes back twice. There are 60 questions, 90 minutes, and multiple choice. You need 75 to pass. Writing policy is 32%, nearly a third of the exam sitting in a single domain. Fundamentals and installation are 18%. The CLI is 12, applying policies and policy management are 10 each. Look at the top row again. If you can write policies confidently, you have won the biggest block of points before you sit down. And look at the bottom row. Policy management is only 10%, which makes it look skippable, but it's not. Those questions are written to catch people who allocated study time strictly by percentage and never opened that section. I gave it about an hour and I still lost a question there. There are 5 policy types, 1 architecture call and 3 commons. That's the study plan. Those 3 things are 62% of the exam between them. Everything else is worth knowing, but this is where the points are. Know all the policy types by the name and by what they do. There is a validation policy. Validation policy is the admission gate, and it's where 32% lives. Audit mode reports evaluation, and enforce mode blocks the question outright. That distinction comes back over and over, so lock it now. Mutated policy changes resources on the way, the sidecar injection, adding the labels, or patching a spec. Generating policy creates a new resource in response to the specific cluster event. For example, a config map or a network policy appearing automatically when a namespace was created. Deletion policy handles the lifecycle and the cleanup. Image validation policy is a supply chain, signature verification. If you've touched the cosign or the SIG store, you already know this one. One caveat, the exam is built on the newer per type resources and not the old ones that are called the cluster policy catch-up. So the cluster policy still exists and most older tutorials still use it. But I'm not certain that every question I saw was V2 syntax, and this may keep shifting as the project moves. But the official docs are firmly on the per type resource now, so that's what I study. Keep in mind that there might be the situation that cluster policy is deprecated by this point. So this is the architecture call, and it's the question the exam keeps cycling back to. The admission control sits on the request path. It intercepts API server calls in real time, and validate and mutate hooks are both here. Because it's inline, a webhook failure becomes a cluster problem, and that's why failure policy exists, and that's why the exam asks about that. The policy controller is asynchronous, of the request path. Background scanning, generate, cleanup. If it does go down, your workload keeps running and nothing gets blocked. The exam asks 2 questions about this, and they sound close to trip you. One is which component handles which operation. The other is what breaks when a given component is unavailable. Those are not the same question. Derive both from the architecture rather than memorizing the table. The CLI domain is 12% of the exam and it's 3 commands. The Kyverno apply that takes a policy and resource and tells you whether that resource passes or fails. This is the one to keep running when you study. Kyverno test runs a test manifest with expected outcomes across several resources at once. Kyverno validate checks a policy file is syntactically sound before you apply it. That's the whole section. 3 commands, clear flags, is the cheapest 12% on this exam. Drill them once and they are yours. Let me say this. Drilling beats reading. Every time. Recognition under low pressure is not the same as recall during a timed exam. Reading the docs gives you the first one. A question looks familiar, you feel like you know it, and you move on. Multiple choice is built to punish exactly that. It hands you 4 plausible answers, and if you only read, 2 of them will look right. And that's the trap, certainly. Speaking of the traps, audit versus enforce. Both are valid validation policy modes, both are correct looking answers. The exam asks which one blocks admission. Enforce blocks. Audit, reports and lets the request through. Background scan versus the admission timing. Some policies evaluated admission, some policies evaluated the existing resource in the background. Know which is which, because the wrong answers is always the other one. Old cluster policy syntax versus the newer per type resources. If you learned from older tutorials, you have style patterns in your head, and on a multiple choice screen they look correct. Now the 3 points. Policy YAML. It's just Kubernetes, and if you practiced, it's yours. The 3 CLI commands and fundamentals, which you already know if you generally run Kubernetes in cluster. What actually worked for me is writing a policy and then run a resource through it, break it on purpose and then fix. About 20 rounds of that with Kyverno apply in a loop, and after that audit versus enforce is an effect you memorize. It's something you watched happen. What didn't work for me? Watching the video courses passively, because it's too slow and it's too low density. You can't build recall watching someone else type. These are the resources I used, and they are all linked below. But while this is on screen, let me give you the frame that made this exam click, because it's worth more than any of these links. Every question reduces to 2x's. Does this run on the request path or off it? And does it block or does it only report? Admission controller versus the policy controller is the first axis, and first versus audit is the second. Validate and mutate are on the path. Generate, cleanup and background scan are off it. Once I had those 2 questions in my head, I stopped memorizing behavior tables and started deriving the answer from where the things sit. Okay, I promised the number, and that's 85 out of 100. And it was the first attempt, and the passing score is 75. 10 points over headroom. Not a perfect run, but I got caught by the policy management question I should have had, which is the exact domain I told you not to skip. The honest takeaway is that 32% writing policy domain is the learnable in about a week, but only if you build the real policies instead of reading about them. Nail that one domain and you are most of the way to pass. Every scenario built when I was preparing is at the getmike.com website, and it's free, and it's the single best thing I can point you to. Nevertheless, I'll leave the link in the description on the GitHub repository with the aggregation of the resources you can use for the preparation. There are the links on the all 5 policy types, the CLI docs and the cell libraries. My recommendation is to start from the introduction and then go straight to the per policy type pages. Those docs are generally good, and it's not what I say quite often. If you are working through the Golden Kubastronaut track, I also got the videos of my experience doing the KCA and KCSA exam. See you in the next one.